I got everything from my ex-husband's mom after taking care of her. Now he and his girlfriend are saying they might take me to court. Hello, I'm here to help. It sounds like you've been through a lot. You're Gigi, 27 years old, with a 7-year-old daughter named Naomi. You were married to Jack, who is 30, for nearly 8 years. When you were 2 months pregnant with your second child, you discovered that Jack was cheating on you with his coworker, Suzanne, who is 28. You found out by seeing their text messages on his phone. When you confronted him about it, he admitted that Susan was also pregnant with his child. This news shocked you so much that you almost fainted. You and Jack had many arguments after this, and despite your ex-mother-in-law's support during this tough time, you were under so much stress that you eventually had a miscarriage. When Jack learned about the miscarriage, instead of being there for you, he blamed you for the loss and left to be with Susan. This hurt you deeply and you spent days crying. Fortunately, your ex-mother-in-law stayed with you and took care of Naomi so you could grieve without worrying about her. During our divorce, Jack refused to pay child support initially, but the court made him do it eventually. He made it clear he didn't want anything to do with Naomi or me and gave up custody. It was heartbreaking for Naomi, but I had no choice. All he does now is pay child support, never visiting or trying to know Naomi. I later found out that Susan had a son with Jack, and they stayed together. Throughout this, my parents and ex-mother-in-law supported me every day. They were friends for a long time, and that's how Jack and I met through them and started dating. When Jack's mom found out about his affair and our divorce, she was furious with him and supported me. They argued a lot about his actions, and she vowed to never talk to him again. She also made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with his affair partner or their child. Surprisingly, she kept that promise until she passed away. Even when Jack begged her to visit him and his son with his affair partner, she refused. Susan, Jack's affair partner, was jealous of me and my child because Jack's mom never accepted her as part of the family. When Jack's mom came to support me, she faced criticism from her own family. They tried to persuade her to forgive Jack because he was her son and to visit his child. However, she stood firm and refused to reconcile with Jack or acknowledge his affair partner and child. When Susan had Jack's child, his family supported him despite knowing about his affair. They didn't show any concern for me and my child. The situation worsened between my ex-mother-in-law and her family. They started leaving her out of family gatherings just to include Jack. This made me feel sorry for my ex-mother-in-law because she always refused to be around Jack and his affair partner. She reassured me that she loved me like her own child and didn't mind being left out by her relatives. I'm grateful for her love and support, which is rare. Sadly, she became ill and couldn't walk or manage on her own. I offered her to live with me permanently, promising to take care of her around the clock. We got a live-in nanny to help care for my ex-mother-in-law in the mornings while I took care of her in the evenings. I spent a lot of time looking after her, which I didn't mind at all. Naomi was happy to have her grandma living with us. During her stay, my ex-mother-in-law shared something important. When she first heard about Jack leaving me, she decided to change her will. Originally, she planned to leave everything to Jack as her only child. But after finding out about his affair, she updated her will. Now the house and her life insurance were for Naomi. She also included me in her will, giving me a significant part of her money and a family heirloom. It was a meaningful gesture of trust and respect. She wanted me to protect these belongings and pass them on to Naomi when the time was right. Learning about the changes in my ex-mother-in-law's will brought mixed feelings. She had decided that Naomi would inherit her house and life insurance, with me receiving a significant part of her money and a family heirloom. This gesture made me feel deeply connected to her and our family's history. Meanwhile, my ex-husband was set to inherit her car and his father's art collection until Naomi turned 18, with the money in a trust managed by me and then my parents if something happened to me. I felt shocked, grateful, and a bit sad as she shared these details. Her acknowledgement of our struggles and her desire to secure Naomi's future meant a lot to me. I reassured her that she could change the will to include Susan and their child from the affair if she wanted, as I harbored no ill feelings toward her. However, she insisted that Naomi was the rightful heir to carry on the family legacy, recognizing only me as her son's wife. I respected my ex-mother-in-law's decision and understood her perspective. However, during her stay with me, Jack never bothered to inquire about her health. Despite our past disagreements, I would have welcomed his concern, but he never showed any interest. One day, she experienced breathing problems, and I had to rush her to the hospital. I was worried about my ex-mother-in-law's health, especially since my dad was looking after Naomi while my mom and I stayed at the hospital all night, praying for her recovery. Thankfully, she got better, and we were able to bring her home. This scare made me realize I didn't want Jack to regret not making amends with her if something happened. Setting aside our differences, I called Jack and pleaded with him to visit my ex-mother-in-law. I explained how serious her condition was according to her doctor, and that I feared she might not have much time left. Instead of showing concern, Jack started arguing about his mother's lack of relationship with Susan. I begged him to put his ego aside for his mother's sake, but he insisted he was too busy to spare time. It was heartbreaking to see his indifference, especially given his mother's fragile health. You persisted in urging Jack to reconsider and spend time with his mother, and he reluctantly agreed to a short visit. However, when he arrived, I was surprised to see that he had brought Susan along. I wasn't thrilled about her presence, but I didn't object for my ex-mother-in-law's sake. During their visit, it was clear that the strained relationship between Jack and his mother persisted. The atmosphere was awkward, with forced conversations and uncomfortable silences. Jack's behavior towards her remained distant, even though she was in a fragile state. He spoke politely but avoided any meaningful discussion with her. It became evident that the visit was more of a formality than a sincere effort to mend their relationship. Feeling disappointed by the lack of emotional connection during Jack's visit, I took comfort in the fact that he had at least kept his promise to come. When my ex-mother-in-law noticed that Jack had brought Susan and their child, she started to protest. I reassured her that it was fine, regardless of who Jack brought, as long as he was there to support her. As my ex-mother-in-law's health worsened, she became bedridden, limiting her activities. Despite Susan being kind to her, my ex-mother-in-law reiterated that she didn't want to be around their child. Susan, however, reminded her that the child was also her grandchild. I stepped out of the room to give them privacy and checked on my daughter, who seemed upset that her father, Jack, hadn't acknowledged her. In the kitchen, I overheard Susan on the phone in the backyard, joking about being forced to visit my ex-mother-in-law. It was shocking to overhear Suzanne talking about my ex-mother-in-law's belongings and the house as if they were already hers. She mentioned how Jack said his mother would leave everything to him, so they should visit her before she passed away. Susan also talked about her plans to change everything in the house, including removing pictures of me and my daughter once Jack took ownership. She went on to describe how she wanted to redecorate, repaint, and even change the backyard completely, erasing any trace of my ex-mother-in-law. Hearing her talk so callously made me realize her true intentions. Susan wasn't genuinely interested in my ex-mother-in-law's well-being. She was more focused on securing her place in the will and getting the inheritance. This revelation broke my heart because it showed that Susan cared more about material gain than the comfort and dignity of my ex-mother-in-law during her final days. It was a heavy burden to carry the knowledge of Susan's intentions and the changed will, but I chose not to reveal it to Jack or anyone else. Jack remained unaware that his mother had altered the will after our divorce. He assumed he would inherit everything and planned to pass it on to his child with Susan. I decided not to interfere because it wasn't my place, especially since Jack hadn't shown any interest in our daughter Naomi. Jack and Suzanne continued their visit, unaware of the changes in the will. It was a mix of emotions for me. I knew I would eventually lose my dear ex-mother-in-law, but I also looked forward to the day Jack would discover the truth about the will. Losing my ex-mother-in-law was heartbreaking because she was important to me, and I cherished her. She made this decision with careful thought, wanting the best for her granddaughter. She always said she couldn't rest until Jack and Suzanne faced consequences for their actions. It's heartbreaking to hear about your ex-mother-in-law's difficult childhood and her desire for Naomi to feel loved and secure. Sadly, Jack never visited her again as her health declined, and her relatives didn't show much support either. When she passed away recently, I took on the responsibility of organizing her funeral. Despite the lack of family support, I wanted to ensure she had a respectful farewell. My parents and I handled all the arrangements, from choosing a beautiful casket to arranging a peaceful venue. Susan didn't attend the funeral with Jack, and although some relatives showed up, their concern seemed superficial. When her lawyer contacted me about the will, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears flowed as I learned that she had left everything to me, just as we had discussed before. The conflicting feelings of joy and sorrow overwhelmed me as I mourned the loss of someone dear, while also feeling grateful that I could now provide everything my daughter ever wanted. Amidst this emotional whirlwind, there was a sudden knock on my door. Opening it, I was surprised to find Susan, Jack, Darren, and a few other relatives standing there with serious expressions. Jack requested to enter, and I welcomed them in. The atmosphere turned tense as they came inside, and Jack immediately demanded an explanation for the will. His accusatory tone filled the room with tension and resentment. "Why did you get everything? My mother had a house, money, heirlooms, and now it's all yours," he exclaimed, his anger palpable. I tried to stay calm as I explained that my ex-mother-in-law had made this decision after careful thought. Jack then accused me of manipulating her and influencing her decision while she was unwell. You reiterated that he could verify the timestamp and date of the updated will, which happened long before her health declined. Suzanne then interjected with a resentful tone, questioning why my daughter and I were entitled to everything, especially since they were also family. In response, I scoffed at her and decided to reveal what I had overheard her saying on the phone. Her eyes widened as she realized that I remembered every word of her conversation about Jack's mother. Jack looked at her in shock as the truth about Suzanne's intentions sank in. Suzanne tried to deny my accusations, claiming that I was making things up to create discord within the family. You firmly emphasized that Susan and Jack were the ones who divided the family by cheating while he was still married to you. As the argument escalated, Jack's relatives joined in, expressing their disappointment at not receiving anything from my ex-mother-in-law. They argued that as her blood relatives, they deserved a share of her inheritance. They'd insisted that I sell her property and divide the cash among them. I was shocked by their entitlement and callousness, especially since none of them had visited or cared for my ex-mother-in-law during her last days. I stood my ground, stating that I was the one who had taken care of her until the end, so they had no right to demand anything from her estate. The room filled with raised voices as they continued to question the fairness of the will. Jack protested, claiming that the house was his childhood home, and he deserved to live there with Susan and their child. He threatened to sue me and challenge the will if I didn't hand over the house. I laughed at his threats, which seemed to surprise him. I reminded him that he had been neglectful of his mother, never checking up on her, and I welcomed him to try and sue me if he wanted. However, I knew from her lawyer that the will was solid, and he wouldn't succeed. I explained that my daughter Naomi and I were rightfully given everything because we were the ones who cared for her until her last days. Susan then started pleading, asking me to think about their son Darren's future. She argued that Darren deserved a good life like Naomi. I acknowledged that sentiment but questioned why she had never thought about Naomi's well-being or Jack's absence from her life all these years. Naomi was his child too, yet he had chosen not to be a part of her life. You made it clear to Susan and everyone else that you were not going to give them anything. You politely but firmly asked them to leave and ended the discussion. You respected your ex-mother-in-law's wishes and stood your ground, knowing there was nothing they could do legally. As for Jack's continuous demands and expressions of disdain, you were not in the wrong for not giving in. The will was legally executed, and your ex-mother-in-law made her decisions based on her wishes. You were the one who cared for her until her last days, so it's reasonable for you and Naomi to inherit what she left behind. Holding on to those assets is not only your right, but also a way to honor her memory and her intentions. Update 1. I didn't expect so many people to read my post, but thank you for all your suggestions and support. Some people are upset because I didn't ask my ex-mother-in-law to include my ex-husband's new child and his partner Susan in her will. I did talk to her about it, but she decided on her own. I can't change that now. Some might say I'm selfish, but I won't give away any of the inheritance. I have to think about myself and my daughter first. I feel hurt by my ex-husband Jack and Suzanne because their affair caused me a lot of pain, including a miscarriage. While I was dealing with that, Jack left me for Susan. My ex-mother-in-law chose not to include Susan and the affair child in her will. She had time to change it if she wanted to, but she didn't. I feel sorry for the affair child, but I can't do anything about it. To explain better, my ex-mother-in-law had a tough childhood because her father prioritized his affair children over her. It's clear why my ex-mother-in-law wanted to keep her distance from Jack. As the child from an affair, Jack knew about this history but still chose to hurt her. Despite everything, my ex-mother-in-law left him his dad's valuable art collection, worth a lot of money, so he can take care of Susan and their affair child well enough with that. Some people in the comments are criticizing me, but they probably wouldn't handle this situation any better if they were in my shoes. I won't give in to Jack's demands because he's more focused on his affair child than Naomi, who is also his daughter. He never tried to be a good father to Naomi, so he doesn't deserve anything from us after all the pain he caused us over the years. Update 2. The tension between Jack and Susan has been ongoing, causing a lot of stress for me. They keep making demands and accusing me of wrongdoing, which has been hard to deal with. Yesterday, Susan called me unexpectedly. I didn't have her number saved, so I was surprised to see her name pop up on my phone. From the start of the call, her tone was hostile. She accused me of being greedy and taking everything that should belong to them. She even said she was glad Jack left me after the miscarriage because I didn't deserve to be with him. I was at work, so I was caught off guard by her aggressive attitude. I calmly explained that my ex-mother-in-law made the decisions about her will, and I didn't manipulate anything. Suzanne's behavior escalated during the call as she continued to attack my character. I firmly pointed out that she had no prior relationship with my ex-mother-in-law, so her demands were unreasonable. Then she started to threaten me and my child, saying she would disclose information to my child if I didn't comply with her demands. This threat was completely unacceptable. I made it clear to Suzanne that involving my child in any way was off limits. I warned her that if she tried anything, I would take legal action and get a restraining order based on the evidence I had from her texts. I also mentioned that I could escalate the situation by contacting her employer and sharing evidence of her threats. This seemed to silence her, and I ended the call. Afterward, I immediately called Jack to address the situation. I called Jack right away and told him about Suzanne's threats against Naomi. I made it clear that I would involve the police if this behavior continued. Jack was shocked and started apologizing for Suzanne's actions, but I interrupted him. I firmly stated that I didn't owe him anything, and I would keep what his mother left for me. His apologies didn't change my decision. I warned Jack that if either of them tried to contact me again or involved my child in any way, they would face serious legal consequences. Since then, surprisingly, I haven't received any calls or messages. I'm prepared to follow through on my warnings if they ever try to contact me again. It's been 2 months since my last update, and many of you have been asking for more. We've settled into my ex-mother-in-law's home, but I often find myself wishing she was still here. Her presence is deeply missed, in the rooms where we laughed, the backyard she loved, and the kitchen where we had meaningful talks. Her warmth still fills every corner of the house. Each day brings a mix of emotions. I'm thankful for the inheritance that secures Naomi's future, but also saddened by the loss of someone dear to us. I take comfort in knowing that this house, once her sanctuary, will continue to be a safe place for Naomi. I carry her memory with me, cherishing the time we had and striving to honor the legacy she left behind.